Have you ever been in a situation where a massive ogre was charging straight at you and you thought, can't you just stand still and let me shoot you please? That's exactly where Web, Grease and Entangle come in. But which one is the best and why? All three of these spells serve a common purpose: stopping enemies from reaching you. Preventing melee attackers from closing the gap can be the difference between a swift victory and a devastating defeat. The best way to use these spells follows a simple but effective strategy. First, position yourself near a choke point like a narrow corridor or pathway. Open spaces make battlefield control much harder, as enemies can simply walk around the affected area. Unless you can cover every possible angle, these spells will be far less effective in an open field. Don't waste these spells on archers or mages. While they might slow ranged attackers down, they won't stop them from pelting you with spells or arrows. And there are far more effective tools for handling those threats. Finally, the ideal setup is to cast your chosen spell in the enemy's path before they even reach you. If possible, prepare your ambush and initiate combat with a ranged attack. And if any manage to push through, use knockbacks to send them right back into the hazard for even more delay. Let's take a closer look at what these spells do, how they differ, and when to use each one. All of these spells have in common that their area of effect counts as difficult terrain, doubling movement cost for any entity trying to traverse through the zone. Let's start with Entangle, a level 1 spell that requires concentration. When cast, it covers a 3-meter area, creating a field of twisting vines for 10 turns. Any enemy caught in it must succeed on a strength saving throw or become entangled for 1 turn. While it's primarily a druid spell, bards can also learn it through their magical secrets ability. Next up is Grease, another level 1 spell that doesn't require concentration. It creates a 5-meter radius of slippery oil. Any creature moving through it must pass a dexterity saving throw or fall prone. This spell is a staple for many arcane casters, being available to wizards, sorcerers of the Black Draconic Bloodline, arcane tricksters and eldritch knights. Finally, we have Web, a level 2 spell that creates a 4-meter radius of sticky webs. Like Entangle, it requires concentration. Creatures passing through must succeed on a dexterity saving throw or become enwebbed. It's accessible to sorcerers, wizards, underdark druids, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights and bards via magical secrets. Since all three spells create difficult terrain, increasing movement cost by 50%, their base effect is the same. Either an enemy is affected by it or they are immune. The key difference comes from their targeted saving throws, which determines whether enemies suffer additional debuffs. Web and Grease require a dexterity saving throw, while Entangle calls for a strength saving throw. This means that heavy-hitting brutes like fighters, barbarians and large monsters, who typically have high strength but weaker dexterity, will struggle more against Web and Grease. Meanwhile, archers, rogues and other agile enemies tend to have stronger dexterity saves, making Entangle the better choice in those cases. In most situations where you want to stop the heavy hitters from approaching you, Web and Grease have a clear edge, while Entangle tends to be the weaker option. However, against the right target, it can still be a valuable tool. When it comes to cost efficiency, Grease and Entangle have a clear advantage over Web, since they are level 1 spells, making them much more accessible. Especially in the early game, when every spell slot counts, Web being a level 2 spell requires a bigger resource investment. Another major factor is concentration. Both Web and Entangle require it, meaning they can be disrupted if you take damage, and they prevent you from maintaining another powerful concentration spell at the same time. Grease, on the other hand, is completely free from this limitation, making it far more flexible. Because of slow cost, reliability and lack of concentration requirement, Grease is a clear winner in terms of cost efficiency. You don't have to worry about losing it due to damage, it only takes a level 1 spell slot and it won't lock you out of using another concentration spell. Each debuff applies its effect in a specific way, and understanding these nuances can be a game changer. Knowing how and when these spells trigger their effects is crucial to optimizing your strategy and ensuring that each cast contributes effectively to controlling the battlefield. There are 3 primary scenarios in which a debuff's effect is triggered. When you cast a spell directly on an enemy, it forces an immediate saving throw. This method applies the debuff right away, but it may not always be the most strategic use of the effect. When an enemy moves into the affected area, the first entry immediately triggers a saving throw. However, additional saving throws will only occur if the enemy crosses a specific distance threshold. For example, if an enemy steps out by just 1 meter and then re-enters during the same turn, the initial trigger does not repeat. In contrast, re-entry on a subsequent turn applies a new trigger. Additionally, if the debuff was activated by casting directly on the enemy, the first movement-based trigger will not occur. Situations such as knockbacks can force the enemy to move and trigger an additional saving throw. This type of movement-based trigger adds another layer of control, as it can reapply the debuff even if the enemy is already within the area. The exact duration of these debuffs, all of them last 1 turn, varies depending on when they are removed from the target. Both web and grease debuffs are removed at the very beginning of the enemy's turn. This means that the effect is cleared before the enemy can take any actions or move. As a result, for the debuff to carry over into your turn, enemies must trigger the effect themselves during their turn, a crucial factor when planning your spell placement. Entangle remains active until the end of the enemy's turn. This means that if the enemy triggers it, the debuff will not carry over into the player's turn, making it essential to apply the debuff during the player's turn for extended effect. Each debuff has unique characteristics that impact both enemy behavior and your team's strategy. Web and Entangle. These spells create a status effect that imposes disadvantage on an enemy's strength and dexterity rolls, as well as on their attack rolls. In return, your party gains advantage on attacks against affected enemies, boosting your offensive capabilities. Grease applies a prone condition, which not only prevents an enemy from taking action, bonus actions and reactions until they stand up, but also forces them to spend 50% of their movement recovering. Melee attacks against a prone enemy benefit from advantage, while ranged attacks from over 3 meters away remain unaffected. Furthermore, the prone condition instantly cancels concentration spells, and disabling reactions can be useful to counter the legendary abilities of some enemies. Based on the behavior and the effects of these debuffs, here are some tactical guidelines for their optimal use. Web and Grease. Casting these spells directly on an enemy will waste the initial entry trigger, as the debuff is applied immediately and then removed at the beginning of the enemy's turn before they can act. Instead, cast the spell in front of the enemy. This forces them to make a saving throw when they cross into the area, effectively stopping their movement instantly and locking them down before they can take any actions. An exception is if an enemy has multiple optional routes to approach you. Casting directly on them might sometimes force the AI to choose to pass the spell's area over bypassing it. With Entangle, its debuff lasts until the end of the enemy's turn, making direct casting much more effective. When applied directly, the enemy remains debuffed throughout their entire turn, suffering from reduced mobility and disadvantage on attack rolls. In scenarios where multiple team members can act before the enemy's turn, the prolonged debuff can maximize your team's offensive advantage. An active trigger, such as knocking an enemy back into the entangled area, can also ensure that the debuff remains effective for the duration of the enemy's turn. Understanding these intricate details allows you to tailor your approach based on your tactical goals. For Web and Grease, casting them in the enemy's path to trigger the saving throw upon entry maximizes their potential by stopping enemies' movement and setting up your team for an attack. Web is especially effective in creating offensive opportunities, while Grease offers a robust defensive control by significantly hampering enemy movement and countering their abilities. On the other hand, Entangle is most powerful when cast directly on the enemy, ensuring a full turn debuff that both reduces their offensive capabilities and provides the team with a window to capitalize on their vulnerability. By mastering these guidelines, you will be able to control the battlefield more effectively, determine whether one of these spells is a suitable counter for your current opponent, and ultimately turn the tide of the battle in your favor. Ranger pets, Druid Wildshapes and summons make Web and Entangle far more accessible. While the standard mage cast Web is a potent, costly second level concentration spell, Druids in Spider Wildshape, the Ranger Beastmaster Spider Pet and certain summoned creatures offer alternative ways to create Web and Entangle effects without using spell slots or concentration. Druids in Spider Wildshape can cast Web as a bonus action, creating a massive 5-meter radius field without requiring concentration and with unlimited uses, making it an incredibly powerful tool for battlefield control. However, there's a common trap players may fall into. Just because you can spam infinite webs doesn't mean you should. In most fights, you will get the most value out of 2 to 3 well-placed webs, but excessive casting just wastes time in spider form, limiting your ability to contribute in other ways. Every round spent casting web is a round you're not using offensive spells like Moonbeam or dealing range damage. Finding the right balance is key. Control the battlefield when needed, but don't neglect your damage output. The Beastmaster Spider Companion has the weakest web of the 3, with a smaller 3-meter radius and a low spell save DC. However, it still doesn't require concentration and has a unique advantage. Unlike the Druid spider form, it can cast Web before combat even starts. This lets the ranger set up battlefield control in advance while their pet operates with its own action economy. With the spider handling crowd control, the ranger is free to focus on dealing damage during the fight. Another way to access battlefield control spells without using your own resource is through Conjure Woodland Being. The summoned Dryad can cast Entangle and also summon a wood boat, which can freely cast Entangle itself in both a 3 meter and 6 meter radius variant at will. Since Entangle is most effective when cast directly on enemies, this allows you to repeatedly reapply the effect every turn. While Entangle still requires concentration, having a summon maintain it frees up your own concentration for other spells, giving you even greater battlefield flexibility. Used correctly, these abilities dramatically improve battlefield control without consuming spell slots. The effectiveness of Grease, Web and Entangle, like all spells that force enemies to make saving throws, depends heavily on your spell save DC. The higher your DC, the harder it is for enemies to resist your battlefield control effects. If you're looking to boost your spell save DC, I will include a wiki link in the video description listing all items that increase it. Certain class abilities can affect enemy saving throws, such as Divination Wizard's Portent Dice, a Lorebard's Cutting Word or a Sorcerer's Haten spell Meta Magic. However, these abilities don't apply to Grease, Web or Entangle, since those spells create persistent surfaces. Instead, they work well with spells like Fear, Command Flee or Thunderwave, which can push or scatter enemies into your control zones. One thing you must always keep in mind: fire is not your friend. No matter which of these 3 surfaces you are using, you don't want them to catch fire. The moment they ignite, they lose all their movement impairing effects, reducing your carefully planned battlefield control to nothing more than a brief flicker of minor burning damage. If you want to maintain control over the battlefield, be mindful of open flames, extinguish torches, and think twice before hurling a fireball into your own web or grease-covered floor. A well-placed spell can dictate the flow of combat, but one stray spark can undo everything in an instant. A well-placed battlefield control spell can already turn the tide of a fight, but you can make it even more effective by forcing enemies to stay inside its area. Pushing or pulling enemies back into Web, Grease or Entangle forces them to make new saving throws, reapplying the spell's effects as if it had just been cast on them. On top of that, enemies will be forced to move through the hazardous terrain all over again, further limiting their mobility. This is especially useful for Entangle, where enemies will suffer disadvantage on attack rolls. There are several ways to force enemy movement, each with its own advantages. Thunderwave, a strong short-range push that can send multiple enemies flying. Gust of Wind, a weaker knockback effect but with much longer range. Eldritch Blast, a staple for Warlocks. This spell fires multiple beams at higher levels, allowing you to push multiple enemies per turn while dealing solid damage, all without expending resources. Shout Action, a simple but effective bonus action that works exceptionally well when combined with difficult terrain. Glyph of Detonation, an expensive but viable option, using a 3rd level spell slot to provide knockback. Grasping Vine, a bonus action spell that summons an immovable vine, repeatedly pulling enemies up to 9 meters towards it. While it deals no damage, it works well in control setups. Notably, a cleric can cast Sanctuary on the vine, making it nearly untouchable since its actions don't break the effect. However, as a 4th level spell, it comes at a high cost, making it an underrated but expensive tool for battlefield manipulation. Telekinesis, a 5th level spell that lets you move enemies every turn, allowing for long distance repositioning straight back into a hazard. Thrown enemies. If you have exceptionally high strength, such as when using a Hill Giant strength potion, you can simply pick up and throw humanoid enemies back into control zones. Jin's Thundering Waves. The Jinni summoned by a Summon Planner ally can cast Thunder Wave once per turn, with unlimited uses, making it a potent battlefield control tool for repeated knockback. By incorporating knockback and forced movement into your strategy, you can keep enemies trapped in your control spells longer, ensuring they remain locked down while your party takes advantage of their weakened state. Some abilities force enemies to move away from you during their turn, or even as an instant movement the moment the spell is cast, effectively acting as a pseudo-knockback by making them flee in the opposite direction. These effects include Command Flee, forces a single enemy to run away for a turn. Olbier's Enrage, a unique ability that induces fear, causing enemies to retreat. Eyebite, Panic, a powerful high-level spell that repeatedly terrifies enemies. Fear Spell, an area-based fear effect that forces multiple enemies to flee. Fleeing scales with the enemy movement speed, meaning a fast-moving enemy will cover a lot of distance when running away. However, if an enemy's movement speed is already severely reduced, they won't be able to flee very far or at all. If you want an enemy to run far away, avoid casting Ray of Frost or Slow on them in the same turn as Command Flee or Fear. Otherwise they will barely move, weakening the effect. When used strategically, fear-based spells and abilities can manipulate enemy positioning just as effectively as Knockback, making them a powerful tool for battlefield control. At first glance, movement-reducing effects seem perfect for difficult terrain. Slowing an already slowed enemy sounds ideal. Some ways to stack movement penalties include Crab Familiar's Pincer Attack reduces movement by 3 meters. Ray of Frost lowers movement by 3 meters. Slow Spell, doubling movement cost and stacking with difficult terrain penalty. Combining these with Grease, Web or Entangle can severely limit an enemy's movement. For example, an enemy recovering from a prone condition while under the slow effect has its movement reduced to 0. However, stacking too many movement penalties can backfire. Grease, Web and Entangle only trigger if an enemy moves a set distance. If you slow them too much, these effects won't activate. If you're relying on the debuffs to take effect, it's better to keep this interaction in mind. If you have seen my video on Darkness and Fog Cloud, you already know that Fog Cloud has some incredible synergies with battlefield control. One of the most frustrating ways enemies can bypass your control zones is by simply jumping over them. However, jumping requires a ground target, and blindness prevents enemies from targeting anything beyond a short distance. Fog Cloud blinds everything inside it, making it impossible for enemies to see their destination. If you place a large enough Fog Cloud so that enemies are blinded before they reach your battlefield hazards, they will be completely unable to jump over them or attack you from range. This forces them to either walk through your control spells or wait outside until they expire. Either way, they become easy targets. A key tactic is to only make your control area as large as you can still effectively shoot into. While Fog Clouds block spell targeting, ranged weapon attacks are still viable, so bring a good bow. Just keep in mind that spells like Call Lightning won't work when trying to target enemies inside the fog. With the right placement, Fog Cloud completely shuts down enemy movement options, ensuring your battlefield control remains unchallenged. Some spells create damage over time fields that turn every corridor into a deadly trap. The spells Cloud of Daggers, Moonbeam and Cloudkill deal damage both when a creature starts its turn inside them and when it crosses their boundary. This makes them especially powerful with forced movement, as enemies can take extra damage each time they are pushed back into the zone. In contrast, spells like Insect Plague, Wall of Fire, Wall of Thorns and Blade Barrier apply damage only once per turn. While they don't benefit from repeated knockback, pairing them with crowd control effects can keep enemies inside longer for sustained damage. Insect Plague also slows enemies, although this doesn't stack with difficult terrain. These spells are a powerful tool for battlefield dominance. Compiling these infos, we can say Web is the most offensive option, ideal for parties that rely heavily on ranged attacks. Although it's more expensive, it provides the highest damage boost thanks to its synergy with attack roads. For maximum effect, enemies must be forced to move through the debuff on their own. It's particularly effective against brute opponents. Entangle is a situational choice that works best against dexterity-based enemies such as rogues and archers. It's especially effective when cast directly on targets to weaken their attacks or when combined with knockback effects to ensure the debuff remains on them. Grease is the most cost-effective and versatile option for controlling the battlefield. Without requiring concentration, Grease is easy to deploy in a fight. It provides the strongest slowing effect of the three and offers additional utility by breaking concentration and preventing legendary reactions. Overall, it stands out as a winner in terms of cost-benefit ratio. You can enhance your control fields by using tactics like adding fog clouds or damage fields, or cast movement impairing effects or fear or knockbacks. Increase your spell DC and avoid fire. If you enjoyed this deep dive, like and subscribe for more spell spotlights. Let me know in the comments which spells you would like me to analyze next.